The beginning, 1890s to 1950s. Before we dive into modern college football realignment, let's rewind to the very start, back when conferences didn't even exist. We're talking the late 1800s. No TV, no NIL deals, not even the forward pass, but people already loved the game, and it was getting messy. Schools played whoever they wanted, eligibility rules were all over the place, and the sport needed a structure. The first conference, the Big Ten, 1896. The very first real college conference was born in the Midwest. It wasn't called the Big Ten yet. The official name was the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representatives. Not exactly a catchy title. It formed after university leaders met in Chicago in 1895 to create order in college sports. A year later, in 1896, 7 schools officially signed on. Chicago, yes, they were a football powerhouse back then. Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, Northwestern, Purdue, Wisconsin. These schools, all clustered in what was then called the West, wanted to make sure academics came first and that athletics didn't spin out of control. The faculty literally ran the conference, setting eligibility rules and limits on games. The model worked so well that it became the blueprint for every other conference that followed. Over the next few decades, the league added Iowa and Indiana, 1899, and Ohio State, 1912, while Chicago eventually dropped football in 1946. By then, the nickname Big Ten had stuck, and the idea of the College Athletic Conference had officially been born. The Big Ten's model caught on fast. Other regions looked at what those Midwestern schools had built: structure, standards, real competition, and wanted their own version. And nowhere was the hunger for organized football stronger than in the South. The South gets organized. The Southern Conference, 1921. By 1921, Southern college football was thriving, wild, passionate, and just a little out of control. Teams scheduled whoever they wanted and rules barely existed. So on February of that year, representatives from 14 schools met in Atlanta and decided to bring order to the madness. The result was the Southern Conference, the first major attempt to organize college football in the South. The founding lineup included Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi State, North Carolina, NC State, Tennessee, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Washington and Lee. Yes, they actually played big-time football back then. The league officially began play in 1922, setting early rules like banning freshmen from varsity sports to keep things academic. Within a year, more schools joined: Florida, LSU, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Tulane, and Vanderbilt, turning it into a massive 20-plus member super league. It didn't take long to see the problem: too many teams, too many rivalries, and too many arguments over who ran the South. The SoCon had become a powerhouse, but it was simply too big to hold together, and that pressure would soon lead to one of the biggest splits in college football history: the birth of the SEC, 1932. By 1932, the Southern Conference had gotten way too big for its own good. With over 24 schools stretching from Maryland to Mississippi, scheduling was chaos and rivalries were impossible to manage. So that December, 13 schools met in Knoxville, Tennessee, and decided to start fresh, forming what became the Southeastern Conference, or SEC. The original lineup looked like this: Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Sewanee, Tennessee, Tulane, and Vanderbilt. That's right, Tulane and even tiny Sewanee were part of the original SEC. It sounds wild now, but back then both programs were legitimate players in Southern football. Sewanee would eventually drop out in 1940 after never winning an SEC game, while Georgia Tech and Tulane stayed until the 1960s. The split was a huge moment, proof that if schools didn't like how things were run, they could walk away and build something new. Now let's rewind a bit. Before the SEC even came along, something was already brewing deep in Texas. In 1914, a group of schools decided to bring order to the wild, unregulated world of Southern football. That's how the Southwest Conference, or SWC, was born. The founding lineup included Texas, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Baylor, Oklahoma, Rice, and Southwestern University. Within a few years, SMU joined in 1918, TCU followed in 1923, and later came Texas Tech, 1956, and Houston, 1970s. The SWC quickly became the heart of Lone Star football. Nearly every powerhouse in Texas called it home, and the rivalries were fierce: Texas versus A&M, SMU versus TCU, Rice trying to spoil the party. For decades, if you wanted to understand Texas football pride, you didn't need a map. You just needed the Southwest Conference. Out west, the Pacific Coast Conference, 1915. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the country, the West Coast was organizing too. In 1915, 1915, the Pacific Coast Conference (BCC) came together. The charter members were California, Washington, Oregon, and Oregon State. Over time, they brought in USC, UCLA, Stanford, Washington State, and more. This group would eventually evolve into the Pac-8, then the Pac-10, and finally the Pac-12, which, spoiler alert, doesn't end so well in modern times. But in its early days, the PCC gave structure to West Coast football, Rose Bowl appearances, Heisman winners, and California glamour. It was the perfect mix of brains and brawn. The stable era, 1920s to 1950s. By the time the 1950s rolled around, college football's map looked clean and familiar. Midwest, Big Ten, South, SEC, Southwest, SWC, West Coast, PCC, East Coast, independents like Army, Navy, Penn, and Notre Dame. And the thing is, it all made perfect sense. The Big Ten had roughly 10 core schools. The SEC was built entirely around the Deep South. The Pacific Coast Conference stretched neatly along the West Coast. Fans could drive to away games, and rivalries stayed regional, local, and fiery. It was stable, logical, and it worked. For decades, little changed. Michigan State joined the Big Ten in 1950, and the ACC broke away from the Southern Conference in 1953, but otherwise the system held firm. There were no billion-dollar TV deals or cross-country leagues, just regional football, full of pride, tradition, and packed Saturday stadiums. The rumbling begins, 1940s to 1990s. By the middle of the 20th century, college football felt like it was on solid ground. Conferences were regional, rivalries were local, and the system looked steady. But slowly, small cracks started to form, and they had very little to do with what was happening on the field. The rumbling came from technology, money, and schools realizing they had more power than the NCAA wanted to admit. The television revolution. Everything shifted when television entered the picture. For decades, the only way to see a game was to buy a ticket and show up in person. That changed once live broadcasts stretched across the country. A Saturday in Michigan could suddenly be watched in California. It should have been a moment of celebration, but the NCAA wasn't excited. They were scared. A study confirmed their worst fear. If fans could sit at home and watch games, they might stop filling stadiums. To protect attendance and their authority, the NCAA took control of television. In 1953, they created the Football Television Committee, which ruled the sport with an iron grip. Only one game could be shown each weekend. A school could appear once per season. NBC bought the exclusive rights for just over $1 million, and every program had to fall in line. The NCAA's thinking was simple: limit exposure, keep stadiums full, and keep schools dependent on them. But not everyone agreed. Notre Dame worked with ABC to show games on tape delay, hoping to get around the rules. The University of Pennsylvania took an even bigger swing, announcing it would televise all of its games. The NCAA's response was swift and brutal. They banned every other school from playing Penn, isolate them, and force them to surrender. It worked, but it revealed something bigger. If television was going to be this important, schools wanted more control. A new conference is born. Around the same time, the Southern Conference was bursting at the seams. Too many teams, too many competing interests. So a group of schools walked away to create something new. Clemson, Duke, Maryland, North Carolina, NC State, South Carolina, and Wake Forest formed the Atlantic Coast Conference. Virginia joined soon after. This wasn't just a matter of geography, it was about ambition. These schools wanted to define themselves on a bigger stage, and the changing media landscape gave them reason to do it. They wanted a stronger brand, a stronger identity, and a chance to step out from the crowd. It was one of the first cracks in the stability that had defined college football for decades, the super conference that never happened. As the 1950s turned into the 1960s, another idea started floating around, one that could have completely changed the sport forever. Jet travel was making cross-country games more realistic, and Tom Hamilton, a Navy athletic director, proposed a coast-to-coast Super League. The plan included heavyweights from the Pacific Coast like USC and UCLA, service academies like Army, Navy, and Air Force, and independent powers like Notre Dame, Penn State, Syracuse, and Pitt. It would have been a national alliance of the biggest brands in both football and academics, something closer to a professional-style league than the regional system that existed. But the Pentagon stepped in and shut it down. They didn't want the service academies pulled into a commercialized structure. With that, the idea died before it even had a chance to launch. Instead, the West Coast schools regrouped into the Athletic Association of Western Universities, the conference that would eventually evolve into the Pac-8. The battle over TV rights. By the 1970s, television had become too big to ignore, and the NCAA's tight control was becoming harder to justify. Programs wanted freedom, and they wanted money. That's when the College Football Association (CFA) formed. This group of 63 major programs came together to fight back. Their demand was straightforward: let us negotiate our own TV deals. The NCAA wasn't having it. They threatened to punish all CFA schools, not just in football, but in every sport. It was a power play meant to crush the rebellion before it could gain momentum. But the schools didn't back down. In 1981, Georgia and Oklahoma took the fight to federal court, arguing that the NCAA NCAA's system was illegal price fixing. The case dragged on for years, but in 1984, the Supreme Court delivered a decision that changed everything. Justice John Paul Stevens declared the NCAA's practices a restraint of trade. In other words, the monopoly was broken. From that moment, the floodgates opened. Schools and conferences could cut their own television deals. The networks went into a frenzy trying to lock up contracts. And right around the corner, a small cable channel called ESPN was beginning to build its presence. The combination of legal freedom and new media platforms set the stage for an explosion of money, the earthquake of the 1990s. While the legal battles reshaped the sport's finances, the 1990s reshaped the map. Until then, realignment had been more of a ripple than a wave. Penn State had chosen independence. A few schools shuffled between leagues, but nothing truly earth-shattering had happened. That all changed at the start of the decade. The first bombshell came when Arkansas left the Southwest Conference for the SEC. Arkansas wasn't just any member, it was one of the league's cornerstones. Their decision to leave shattered the belief that conference loyalty was permanent. It showed that tradition meant little when money and stability were on the line. If Arkansas could leave its home, anyone could. The SEC didn't waste time building on that move. In 1991, they added South Carolina, giving them 12 members and the ability to create something brand new, a conference championship game. It was the first of its kind, a postseason matchup that brought in massive television audiences and piles of money. Every other conference saw what the SEC had just invented and immediately wanted one of their own. Not to be left out, the ACC made its own statement in 1992 by bringing Florida State into the fold. Florida State had become one of the nation's premier programs under Bobby Bowden, and its arrival gave the ACC football credibility it had lacked. The league, once seen as more of a basketball power, suddenly had a national contender anchoring its football identity, the death of the Southwest Conference. But the biggest casualty of the 1990s was the Southwest Conference. For decades, it had been the pride of Texas football, a league built around regional rivalries and local dominance. But television money was changing the game, and the SWC simply couldn't keep up. Between 1994 and 1996, the league unraveled. Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, and Baylor joined forces with the Big 8 schools to create the new Big 12. That left SMU, TCU, Houston, and Rice scrambling for a future outside of the power structure. Just like that, a conference that had existed for 80 years vanished from the map. A new era. By the end of the 1990s, the landscape of college football looked nothing like it had just a generation earlier. The NCAA no longer controlled television. ESPN had become a dominant force. Conferences were adding members not for geography or tradition, but for money and exposure. Championship games were becoming major events, and the collapse of the Southwest Conference was a reminder that no league was untouchable. The sport had crossed into a new age. The days of simple regional alignments were over. From here on, every decision would be driven by television deals, brand power, and the chase for money. The rumbling that started in the age of black and white broadcast had turned into full-blown earthquakes by the 1990s, and the ground was only going to get shakier. Super Conference Era 1.0, 2000 to 2010. By the early 2000s, college football looked calm on the surface. The sport had survived the 1990s. The old Southwest Conference had disappeared, the Big 12 had been born, and the SEC had already proven that a conference championship game could turn Saturday afternoons into TV gold. Every league had its place. The SEC ruled the South, the Big 10 owned the Midwest, the ACC was still basketball heavy, and the Big East somehow held its own as a football conference with Miami, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. Fans believed the map was finally set, but under the calm surface, television money was quietly reshaping everything. The 2000s would be the decade when college football stopped being regional and started being corporate. The calm before the storm, 2000 to 2002. At the turn of the millennium, things looked peaceful. The Power Six, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, Pac-10, and Big East formed the top tier of college football. Each had its TV deals, bowl tie-ins, and identity. The SEC was thriving with teams like Florida, LSU, and Tennessee drawing massive TV ratings. The Big 12 had national powers Oklahoma, Texas, and Nebraska. The Big 10 had tradition and loyal fan bases. The ACC remained more known for basketball than football. The Pac-10 was steady and traditional with USC, UCLA, and Oregon leading the way. The Big East was a bit of an odd one out, smaller but still respectable, with Miami and Virginia Tech carrying its football flag. But new technology and media deals were changing the math. Cable networks realized live sports were the only thing people still watched in real time. The SEC's success with its championship game and big TV contracts made other leagues realize something. Staying small meant leaving money on the table. Bigger meant richer, and everyone wanted a bigger cut. The ACC raids the Big East 2003 to 2005. The first domino fell in 2003. The ACC, eager to strengthen its football reputation and expand its TV reach, set its eyes on the Big East. Its targets, Miami, Virginia Tech, and Boston College. The ACC's motivation wasn't just football power, no one, it was geography and television markets. Adding those schools would give them a presence in major cities like Miami, Boston, and Washington, D.C. The Big East fought hard to stop it, even suing the ACC, but the money and long-term stability were too good to pass up. By 2004, Miami and Virginia Tech were gone. Boston College followed in 2005. Overnight, the ACC turned from a basketball league into a serious football player. For the Big East, it was devastating. It lost its biggest names and its national brand. To survive, the conference pulled in Louisville, Cincinnati, and South Florida from Conference USA and promoted UCNN to full football status. The Big East kept its BCS bowl slot for now, but its days as a power conference were numbered. The BCS era and the rise of TV power, mid-2000s. While conferences shuffled teams, the real force behind everything was television. The Bowl Championship Series, BCS, created in 1998, gave automatic bowl access and big money to the top conferences. That meant being in a BCS league wasn't just about prestige. It was a golden ticket to millions in TV revenue. Networks like ABC, CBS, and ESPN started pouring money into exclusive contracts. Saturday games became national events. The SEC, Big Ten, and Big 12 signed massive TV deals that widened the financial gap between them and everyone else. Suddenly, athletic directors realized our biggest opponent isn't another school. It's being left behind financially. Every realignment discussion from this point forward came down to one question: who controls the TV rights? The Big Ten changes the game, 2007 to 2009. In 2007, the Big Ten quietly made the most revolutionary move of the decade. It launched the Big Ten Network. It was the first conference-owned sports channel in college football history. For fans, it meant they could watch every Big Ten game, from football to volleyball, all year long. For the conference, it meant a brand new revenue stream. Every cable household that carried the Big Ten Network paid the league. Every time a new school joined, the channel could demand carriage in that state, which meant more money. Suddenly, adding teams wasn't just about geography or rivalry, it was about expanding TV markets. The Big Ten had cracked the code: grow your footprint, grow your profits. The Big Ten's success inspired everyone else to think like a business. Conferences started hiring media executives instead of just athletic directors. The future of college football would now be written in boardrooms, not locker rooms. The Pac-10 Eyes expansion, 2009 to 2010. Out west, the Pac-10 didn't want to get left behind. Commissioner Larry Scott had big dreams. He wanted to turn the league into a coast-to-coast media powerhouse. In 2010, he tried to form a Pac-16 super conference. The idea was to bring in 6 Big 12 schools: Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and Colorado, creating a 16-team league that would dominate both coasts. It nearly happened. Texas and Oklahoma were tempted, but the deal broke down over money. The Pac-10 wanted equal revenue sharing. Texas wanted control of its own TV rights. That disagreement killed the deal. Still, the Pac-10 didn't walk away empty-handed. Colorado accepted the invite, and Utah was added soon after. The league rebranded as the Pac-12, officially expanding for the first time in decades. The Big 12 starts to crack, late 2000s to 2010. The Pac-10's bold move exposed the Big 12's biggest problem: Texas had too much power. The Big 12 had always been a delicate mix: the old Big 8 schools from the Midwest and the newer Texas schools from the Southwest. But Texas generated the most money and demanded special treatment. When Texas announced the creation of the Longhorn Network in partnership with ESPN, a 24-hour channel dedicated to just Texas athletics, the rest of the conference lost it. It was seen as proof that Texas was running the show. Nebraska, tired of Texas's dominance, bolted for the Big Ten in 2010. Colorado had already left for the Pac-12. Missouri and Texas A&M began seriously exploring their options. The conference that had once looked like the future of college football suddenly looked fragile. The cracks were now too deep to ignore. The SEC waits its turn. While chaos spread elsewhere, the SEC quietly stayed on top. Its TV deals with CBS and ESPN made it the wealthiest and most watched league in the country. Saturday nights in the SEC were must-watch TV. But SEC Commissioner Mike Slive wasn't just watching, he was plotting. He knew that the next realignment wave would be about television markets and brand reach, not geography. So when schools like Texas A&M and Missouri started looking for new homes, the SEC was ready to strike, setting the stage for the next decade's expansion boom. The Big East's slow collapse. Meanwhile, the Big East was running out of lifelines. It still had strong football schools: West Virginia, Louisville, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, but it couldn't match the money pouring into other leagues. Without a championship game or its own TV network, the Big East fell behind financially. When the ACC and Big Ten began eyeing more expansion in the late 2000s, the Big East knew it was living on borrowed time. The next wave, and coming in the early 2000s, would finish what the ACC raid had started. By 2010, the fuse was lit. By the end of the 2000s, college football had completely changed, even if fans hadn't realized it yet. The ACC had transformed into a football conference. The Big Ten had turned media rights into an empire. The Pac-12 had expanded westward. The Big 12 was splitting at the seams. The Big East was fading fast, and the SEC was sitting on top, waiting to make its next move. Conferences were no longer just athletic partnerships, and they were business ventures. Every decision from here on out would be driven by TV contracts, brand growth, and streaming rights. 2010 to 2012, the realignment earthquake. Between 2010 and 2012, the entire structure of college football shifted. In just 3 years, nearly every major conference changed its shape. The Pac-10 becomes the Pac-12. In 2010, the Pac-10 made its first big move. It extended invitations to several Big 12 schools in an attempt to form a super conference. The full plan didn't happen, but two teams did make the jump. Colorado left the Big 12 in 2010. Utah from the Mountain West was invited soon after. By 2011, the league rebranded as the Pac-12, expanding its reach into new states and new TV markets. Nebraska heads to the Big 10. Meanwhile, longtime Big 12 powerhouse Nebraska grew frustrated with Texas's dominance in conference politics and media money, especially after the creation of the Longhorn Network. In 2010, Nebraska accepted an invitation to join the Big 10, officially joining in 2011. This move gave the Big 10 a historic program, and it gave Nebraska stability and bigger paychecks. The SEC gets even stronger. The SEC, already the king of college football, saw an opportunity to grow even more. In 2011, Texas A&M announced its departure from the Big 12, followed shortly by Missouri. Both joined the SEC in 2012, expanding the league's footprint into Texas and giving it 14 teams. It was a perfect business move. More states, more TV households, and 2 new major recruiting territories. The Big 12 fights for survival. The Big 12 suddenly found itself bleeding members. Colorado, Nebraska, Texas A&M, and Missouri were gone. Many feared the conference would collapse, but Commissioner Bob Bowlesby moved fast to stabilize it. The league invited TCU from the Mountain West and West Virginia from the Big East to join in 2012. With those additions, the Big 12 held steady at 10 schools. Ironically, no longer 12, but still alive. The Big 10 expands again. Not satisfied, the Big 10 kept looking east. In 2012, it added Maryland from the ACC and Rutgers from the Big East. The moves shocked traditionalists. Neither school had a huge football legacy, but they brought something more valuable: television markets in Washington, D.C., and New York City. Those markets would massively increase the Big 10 network's subscription base. The Big East collapse and the birth of the AAC. All this movement left the Big East in shambles. Once home to Miami, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia, it lost almost all its football powerhouses. By 2013, the football schools and basketball schools officially split. The 7 Catholic basketball schools like Georgetown and Villanova kept the Big East name for basketball. The remaining football schools, Cincinnati, Louisville, UConn, USF, and others, formed the American Athletic Conference, AAC, in 2013. It was the official end of the Big East as a football power. The Power 6 became the Power 5, and the AAC became the strongest of the group of 5. 2014 to 2020, the calm after the storm. After 2014, the dust finally began to settle. The chaos had reshaped the Power 5 conferences into what they are today, and for nearly a decade, things stayed remarkably stable. But beneath that calm, the seeds of the next storm were already being planted. The Big 10 and SEC cement their dominance. The Big 10 and SEC emerged as the undisputed giants of college football. They controlled the biggest TV deals, the largest fan bases, and the most consistent playoff contenders. The Big 10 leaned on its deep tradition and the success of the Big 10 network. The SEC, meanwhile, doubled down on its media power, launching the SEC network in 2014 through a massive partnership with ESPN. Both conferences were making more money than ever, hundreds of millions per year in shared revenue. The Pac-12 and ACC hold their ground. The Pac-12, freshly rebranded and geographically massive, looked strong at first. It launched its own Pac-12 network in 2012 to capitalize on the new media model. But unlike the Big 10 and SEC, it couldn't reach national distribution. Many cable providers refused to carry it, and revenue fell short. The ACC, meanwhile, stayed stable but cautious. With teams like Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, it kept its national respect. However, the Big 10's and SEC's financial advantage was becoming impossible to ignore. The Big 12 survives and adapts. Despite being left for dead, the Big 12 managed to remain competitive. The conference scrapped its 2-division format, allowing every team to play each other. It also introduced a championship game again in 2017, restoring some of its lost prestige. Schools like Oklahoma and Oklahoma State carried the banner, keeping the Big 12 relevant in playoff races. The American Athletic Conference steps up. While technically a Group of 5 conference, the AAC quickly became the best of the rest. UCF, Houston, and Cincinnati emerged as nationally ranked programs. UCF's undefeated 2017 season and its self-declared national championship showed that even smaller leagues could make noise. Still, the AAC's financial gap with the Power 5 remained massive. The college football playoff era begins, 2014. One of the biggest changes in this period wasn't a realignment move, but it changed the sport forever. The College Football Playoff, CFP. Introduced in 2014, it replaced the BCS and allowed the top 4 teams to compete for a true national championship. This new system made conference strength even more important. Being in a Power 5 conference became almost a requirement for playoff consideration, and that reality would later fuel the next wave of realignment in the 2020s. What stayed quiet and what was coming? From 2014 to 2020, the landscape appeared stable. No schools jumped conferences, no new super leagues formed, and most fans got used to the new normal. But behind closed doors, athletic directors and TV executives were already thinking ahead. Television contracts, on which typically lasted about a decade, were scheduled to expire in the early 2020s. When that time came, the value of live sports, especially college football, would be even higher. Conferences began quietly positioning themselves for renegotiations. The Pac-12, whose network was underperforming, needed new partners. The Big 12 remained financially behind the Big 10 and SEC, and the ACC locked into a long-term TV deal through 2037, worried about falling behind. Everyone was waiting, patiently, for the next opportunity. By 2020, a fragile peace. By the start of the new decade, college football looked stable, but it was a calm built on money, not loyalty. The Power 5 conferences were set. Big 10, financially dominant, national reach. SEC, on-field powerhouse, media empire. ACC, steady but under pressure. Pac-12, respected but struggling financially. Big 12, smaller but resilient. Everyone had survived the 2010s, but the balance was temporary. As TV contracts approached renewal and new digital platforms emerged, the question wasn't if another realignment wave would come, it was when. The 2020s, chaos. After nearly a decade of calm, college football was shaken again starting in 2021. The sport that had finally seemed stable after years of realignment suddenly found itself in chaos once more. This time, the changes weren't just about geography, they were about survival. TV contracts, streaming wars, and the race for national exposure would push college football into its most dramatic transformation yet. From 2021 to 2025, the Power 5 conferences were turned upside down. The Pac-12 collapsed, the Big 12 reinvented itself, and the SEC and Big 10 became mega leagues. By 2025, college football looked nothing like it had 5 years earlier. The shockwave of 2021, Texas and Oklahoma start the storm. On July 21st, 2021, the Houston Chronicle broke the news that changed everything. Texas and Oklahoma, the 2 most powerful members of the Big 12, had approached the SEC about joining. Within days, both schools confirmed the rumors. It was a massive blow to the Big 12. Texas was its financial engine, and Oklahoma was its football powerhouse. Losing them meant the conference's national reputation and its media value would crater. The SEC, already the wealthiest and most successful conference, welcomed the move. Adding Texas and Oklahoma expanded the league's reach into 2 more states and added historic rivalries like Texas versus Texas A&M back into the fold. The deal was approved quickly, with the move officially set to take effect in 2025, though everyone knew it might happen sooner. For the Big 12, it felt like deja vu. Once again, the league that had survived near collapse in the 2000s and 10s looked like it might not make it this time. But new commissioner Brett Yormark, replacing Bob Bowlesby, had other plans. The Big 12 fights back, 2021 to 2022. Within months, the Big 12 made its counterattack. To replace Texas and Oklahoma, the conference added 4 new schools: BYU, Independent, Cincinnati, American Athletic Conference, Houston, AAC, UCF, AAC. These weren't traditional powerhouses, but they brought massive TV markets, Houston and Orlando, and passionate fan bases. It was a survival move, but it worked. The Big 12 stabilized, showing it could survive even without its 2 biggest brands. The new members were scheduled to join in 2023, keeping the league's television value strong enough to stay relevant. For now, the Big 12 had dodged death. But while the Big 12 was patching itself together, another even bigger shift was brewing out west. 2022, USC and UCLA shattered the Pac-12. On June 30th, 2022, reports surfaced that USC and UCLA, 2 founding members of the Pac-12, were leaving for the Big 10. It was an earthquake. The Big 10, long a Midwestern league of cold weather schools, was suddenly extending all the way to Los Angeles. For the Pac-12, it was devastating, losing the LA market and its 2 most recognizable brands tripled its TV value overnight. For the Big Ten, it was a masterstroke. The conference could now broadcast games in every time zone, noon kickoffs in the West, primetime games in the Midwest, and late-night matchups in LA. This was more than football. It was a business empire. Many fans thought the chaos would stop there, but the dominoes had only started to fall. 2000 to 23, the collapse of the Pac-12 and the rise of the Power Four. By 2023, the Pac-12 was living on borrowed time. Commissioner George Kliavkoff tried to secure a new TV deal to keep the league together, but negotiations went badly. ESPN and Fox lost interest, and streaming companies like Apple offered deals far below expectations, around $23 million per school per year, far less than what other power conferences were making. The schools grew restless. Colorado, eager to reunite with old rivals and chase more stable money, became the first to bolt, rejoining the Big 12 in July 2023. That opened the floodgates. Within weeks, the rest of the Pac-12's top programs began to scatter. Oregon and Washington accepted Big 10 invitations. Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah jumped to the Big 12. Cal and Stanford went east, joining the ACC, along with SMU from the AAC, in a stunning coast-to-coast expansion move. By September 2023, the once proud Pac-12 was reduced to just 4 schools: Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. But soon, even Cal and Stanford were gone to the ACC. The league became the Pac-2. The Power 5 had effectively become the Power 4 section Big 10, Big 12. A CC 2024, the Great Reshuffle. As the dust settled in 2024, college football looked almost unrecognizable compared to 3 years earlier. The SEC's superpower era begins. The SEC officially welcomed Texas and Oklahoma, forming a 16-team juggernaut that stretched from Florida to Texas to Missouri. The conference now held some of the sport's most valuable brands: Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, Texas, and Oklahoma, all under one banner. It wasn't just a football move, it was a media empire. The SEC's TV deal with ESPN was worth more than $3 billion, ensuring its programs would dominate Saturday broadcasts for years. The Big Ten goes national. The Big Ten, now featuring USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, became truly coast to coast. With 18 teams, it stretched from Rutgers in New Jersey to USC in California. It also secured an enormous new media deal with Fox, CBS, and NBC, worth over $7 billion. The Big Ten and SEC had become the 2 superpowers of college football, and arguably the 2 most powerful entities in all of college sports. The Big 12's remarkable reinvention. The Big 12, once thought doomed, emerged stronger than ever. With Colorado, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah joining in 2024, the league regained a national presence. Combined with its 2023 additions, BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston, the Big 12 stretched from Florida to Utah and became a truly national conference again. The ACC goes coast to coast. In a last-ditch attempt to stay relevant, the ACC expanded west, adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU. The move was strange. A North Carolina-based conference now had members in California and Texas, but it brought new markets and storylines. The Pac-12's near death. By the end of 2024, only Oregon State and Washington State were left in the Pac-12. The 2 schools sued the departing members for control of the conference's name and assets, and won. With legal ownership of the Pac-12's brand and NCAA rights, they set out to rebuild it from the ashes. 2025, rebuilding the West. By 2025, the Pac-12's revival was underway. To survive as an FBS conference, it needed at least 8 football members. Throughout 2025, it announced several additions to return to that number by 2026. Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, Utah State, San Diego State. And in mid-2025, the final piece fell into place when Texas State joined as the 8th full member. The rebuilt Pac-12 would officially relaunch in 2026, combining traditional Western power programs with ambitious mid-majors. Meanwhile, smaller conferences adjusted too. Delaware and Missouri State moved up from the FCS to join Conference USA. UMass joined the MAC, ending its long run as an independent. The reshuffling affected every corner of college football, from the top of the SEC down to the smallest group of 5 leagues. What's next in college football realignment? We're far from seeing the final map of college football realignment. In many ways, we're only in the middle chapters. Looking ahead, several scenarios and pressures may reshape the landscape again, possibly deeper than what we've already witnessed. Super leagues and breakaway conferences. One possibility is that the SEC and Big Ten continue expanding until each controls 20 to 24 of the top programs. At that point, they might formally break away from the NCAA's control and run their own playoff or championship systems. That move would effectively split the elite from the rest. The ACC and Big 12, having lost marquee programs, would become second-tier conferences, much like today's Group of 5. The appeal is control over revenue, media contracts, and playoff access without being held back by less valuable members. But the legal, financial, and governance hurdles are huge. Grant of rights contracts, NCAA rules, and political political resistance would all be major obstacles. Private equity and commercialization. Another major force is private capital investment. Conferences and schools are exploring turning media rights, sponsorships, and intellectual property into commercial assets for outside investors. For example, the Big Ten is in talks about a $2 billion private capital deal to launch a new commercial arm, often referred to as Big Ten Enterprises. In that model, investors take stakes in revenue-generating operations, TV rights, naming, licensing, but don't necessarily manage daily athletic decisions. Over time, though, such deals could shift power away from academic oversight toward commercial interests. As costs rise for facilities, recruiting, and athlete support, outside capital could become more attractive, even essential for ambitious programs. Grant of rights and contract battles. Grant of rights are the legal glue that binds schools to conferences by giving their media rights to the league for many years. The Big Ten is reportedly discussing extending its grant of rights through 2046 to lock in members tightly. That makes leaving expensive or contractually near impossible, but some schools, especially in the ACC, are rumored to be looking to exit. If powerhouses like Florida State or Clemson succeed, the entire conference could unravel. The fight over grant of rights may become a battlefield for which conferences survive or collapse. Player compensation and the financial arms race. NIL rules and possible revenue sharing are game changers. In the future, the conferences may realign based on who can subsidize athlete compensation and share revenue fairly. Programs in weaker conferences with limited media income will struggle to offer competitive deals. The arms race for coaching salaries, facilities, and performance bonuses will widen the gap between elite and mid-tier schools. Relegation/European models. Improbable. Some have floated the idea of promotion and relegation like European soccer. Poor performers drop to a lower tier, and rising ones move up. Though conceptually appealing, this is unlikely to be adopted. The financial guarantees, media deals, and institutional expectations in U.S. college football make voluntary relegation almost impossible. Conferences and schools prize stability above all. What's likely to happen? Putting the trends together, a plausible course over the next decade might look like this. The SEC and Big Ten expand further, solidifying their dominance and possibly functioning as independent super leagues. They extend grant of rights contracts to anchor membership and deter defections. They attract private capital to their commercial arms, rerouting revenue sources. The ACC and Big 12 could be relegated to a secondary status, forced to merge, rebrand, or exist as feeders to the super conferences. Smaller conferences may shrink, collapse, or serve as feeder leagues. Geography and tradition will lose ground in decision-making. TV markets, brand value, and playoff access will dominate. Longtime rivalries may be broken, realigned, or erased. Schools will switch leagues based on opportunity, not loyalty.